The bustling showroom floor of a luxury car dealership symbolizes success and sophistication. Shiny vehicles gleam under bright lights as customers wander, their dreams reflected in polished chrome. Among them stands Kai James, a man dressed modestly, with a confident posture but a reserved expression. Behind the sales counter, Richard Hill, the dealership manager, spots him. His gaze lingers for just a moment before shifting into disdain. Without hesitation, he strides over. "Looking for something?" Richard asks, his tone sharp, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. Kai gestures toward a sleek, high-end model. "I'm interested in that one." A smirk creeps across Richard's face. "That one? Sure, but maybe start with something a little more realistic. Our used inventory is right outside." The room seems to quiet for a moment as Kai processes the insult. He stands there, calm but firm. "I'd still like to see it." Richard's smirk vanishes, replaced by a dismissive wave. "Let's not waste anyone's time here. Guys like you don't buy cars like this." Nearby customers glance over, some whispering, others awkwardly avoiding eye contact. The humiliation hangs in the air, heavy and undeniable. But Kai doesn't flinch. He simply tilts his head, his expression unreadable. At that moment, the room seemed to freeze. But what no one could have known was that Kai James had already made a decision. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Before we get into this story, take a moment to share where you're watching from in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for daily new stories. To understand this moment, we need to look deeper. Kai James wasn't just a customer walking into a car dealership. He was a man with a story. Born and raised in this very town, Kai had known struggle early on. His mother worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, while his father, a Vietnam veteran, taught him the value of perseverance. As a boy, Kai had walked past this same dealership, peering through the glass at cars he could only dream of owning. Those dreams drove him to excel. He left his hometown after high school, determined to carve a path no one else in his family had. Years later, through hard work, ingenuity, and a refusal to accept the limits others placed on him, Kai built a thriving tech company. Now, with his success firmly established, he had returned, not just to revisit the streets he once called home, but to invest in his community. For Kai, buying a luxury car wasn't just about rewarding himself. It was a statement, a silent acknowledgement of how far he'd come. But when Kai stepped into the dealership that day, he didn't wear the trappings of success. His outfit was simple, a well-worn hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. He wasn't there to flaunt wealth. He was there to make a purchase, like any other customer. The dealership itself was a symbol of exclusivity. Rows of high-end vehicles gleamed under the showroom lights, and customers in designer clothes were met with eager smiles from the staff. But for those who didn't fit the mold, it was a different experience entirely. At the center of this dynamic stood Richard Hill, the dealership's longtime manager. Richard prided himself on maintaining what he called standards. His background wasn't one of hard-earned success like Kai's. Richard's rise had been steady but unremarkable, built on connections and an unshakable belief in his judgment. Richard liked to think he could size up customers the moment they walked through the door. To him, appearances said everything. A sharp suit meant money, casual attire meant trouble, or so he thought. And while he rarely voiced his assumptions outright, his actions often spoke louder than words. That day, when Kai walked in, Richard noticed him immediately. It wasn't just the casual clothing, it was the way Kai moved with quiet confidence, as though he belonged there. To Richard, this was an affront. For years, Richard had operated on instinct, assuming he could read people at a glance. To him, Kai wasn't a serious buyer. He was a distraction, someone who didn't belong among the wealthy clientele Richard catered to. As Kai moved toward the luxury section, Richard kept his distance, his eyes narrowing. His staff followed his lead, exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. Kai noticed, but said nothing. He simply walked up to a high-end model, a sleek black sedan, and began examining it closely. That's when Richard decided to intervene. Richard's voice carried over the hum of quiet conversations and the clicking of keyboards. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his tone clipped. Kai turned, his expression calm. "Yes, I'm interested in this model. Could you tell me more about it?" Richard's lips curled into a tight smile, but his eyes betrayed his skepticism. "This model, sure, but let's be honest, most people start with something more practical. Our used inventory might be a better place to look." Kai didn't react right away. He simply studied Richard, his gaze steady, almost as though he were weighing the manager's words. Around them, the room grew quieter. Staff members and customers nearby began to notice the interaction, their conversations halting. For Kai, moments like this weren't unfamiliar. He'd faced prejudice before, quiet assumptions and outright dismissals. But something about Richard's tone, his posture, felt deliberate. Kai could sense that this was about more than just a car. The showroom was designed to make every visitor feel like they were stepping into a world of luxury and privilege. But for Kai James, it was becoming clear that this world wasn't designed with him in mind. Kai had been standing by the car for several minutes, examining the fine details of its craftsmanship. Nearby, salespeople glanced his way, then quickly turned their attention back to other customers, their smiles fading when their eyes landed on him. No one approached to offer assistance. Instead, Richard Hill stood at his station, arms crossed, watching Kai like he was waiting for a reason to step in. The longer Kai lingered near the car, the more Richard's annoyance seemed to grow. Finally, as if unable to tolerate the situation any longer, Richard made his move. "Are you finding everything okay?" Richard asked, his voice sharp and formal but lacking any warmth. Kai turned to him and smiled politely. "Yes, I was wondering if I could take a look at this car up close." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. He tilted his head as though studying Kai, his gaze sweeping over the hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. Then, after a beat, he let out a short, dismissive laugh. "That one," Richard said, gesturing toward the sleek luxury sedan. "It's a little out of most people's price range. If you're serious about buying today, we have some great options in the used section." It wasn't just the words. It was the way Richard said them. The condescension in his tone was unmistakable, the implication crystal clear. Kai was being judged not for his interest in the car, but for what Richard assumed about him. For a moment, Kai said nothing. He simply looked at Richard, his face betraying none of the emotions stirring within. "I'm not interested in the used section," Kai replied evenly. "I'd like to see this car." Richard sighed, his patience wearing thin. "Look, I've been doing this for a long time, and I can usually tell when someone is here to buy a car. We don't waste our time showing these models to people who clearly can't afford them." The words hung in the air, louder than the hum of showroom conversations and the faint clicking of keyboards in the background. A few customers and staff turned to look, their curiosity piqued by the sharpness of Richard's tone. Kai remained composed, but the weight of the insult was unmistakable. It wasn't just about the car, it was about being dismissed, being reduced to a stereotype. Richard, emboldened by Kai's lack of reaction, continued. "I mean, don't get me wrong, we have options for every budget, but this is for serious buyers." Kai didn't flinch. He didn't argue. Instead, he nodded slightly, as if to acknowledge what had just been said. Then, in a calm, measured tone, he asked again, "Can I see this car?" "Fine," Richard snapped, "but don't say I didn't warn you. Let's not waste too much time here." The humiliation was public, deliberate. For Kai, moments like this were familiar, yet they never became easier to endure. But what the others in the showroom couldn't see, what Richard couldn't comprehend, was that Kai wasn't simply standing his ground. He was taking note. Every word, every dismissive gesture, every condescending glance was being etched into Kai's memory. This wasn't just a transaction anymore. It was something far bigger. As Kai stepped closer to the car, his focus shifted to its details, running his fingers over the smooth exterior. He asked a question about the engine specifications, his voice steady and clear. Richard responded curtly, barely masking his irritation. But while Richard continued to dismiss Kai's questions with half-hearted answers, Kai maintained his composure. Behind his calm demeanor, however, something had shifted. This was no ordinary customer interaction, and soon everyone in that room would come to understand just how much they had underestimated Kai James. The tension in the room continued to grow, though Kai seemed entirely unaffected. He remained poised, his questions precise and polite, but with every request he made, Richard's frustration became more apparent. "All right, so you want to know about the specs?" Richard said with a forced smile. "This model is a top-tier luxury vehicle, fully loaded, not in the budget range for just anyone." He gestured vaguely as if the words "just anyone" carried a specific weight. Kai ignored the implication. "It sounds impressive. Can I take it for a test drive?" The question landed like a challenge. For a moment, Richard didn't respond. Then he crossed his arms, his expression shifting from feigned politeness to open hostility. "We don't just hand over the keys to these cars," Richard said, his voice louder now, drawing the attention of customers nearby. "You need to prove you're serious. Most people who ask for a test drive can show credentials." Kai raised an eyebrow. "Credentials?" "You know what I mean," Richard replied sharply, his tone betraying his thin patience. "Proof you can buy the car. A lot of people like to window shop, but this isn't a rental service." For the first time, Kai let a small pause hang in the air. He looked at Richard, his expression neutral but deliberate. Then, with a steady voice, he said, "I'll ask one more time. Can I take it for a test drive?" Richard leaned back slightly, exhaling sharply through his nose. His gaze darted around the room, landing briefly on a few customers who were now openly watching the interaction. Finally, he waved over a security guard stationed near the entrance. "All right," Richard said loudly, gesturing toward Kai. "If you're not here to buy, you can leave. We don't waste time on this kind of nonsense." The guard approached, but before he could say anything, a soft but firm voice interrupted. "Excuse me," said a junior salesperson who had been standing nearby, quietly observing the exchange. The salesperson, a young woman named Lisa, stepped forward, her face a mix of concern and determination. "Sir," Lisa addressed Kai directly, ignoring Richard's glare, "if you'd like, I can show you the car in more detail. Maybe we can start with a closer look before discussing a test drive." Richard's eyes narrowed as he turned to Lisa, clearly irritated by her intervention. But before he could object, Kai nodded. "Thank you," Kai said, his tone warm and sincere. "I appreciate that." Lisa led Kai toward the car, her professionalism starkly contrasting with Richard's demeanor. As they walked, Kai leaned in slightly and said, "I can tell this isn't easy for you. Thanks for stepping in." Lisa offered a small, nervous smile. "I just believe in treating people with respect," she said softly, before gesturing to the car. While Lisa went over the car's features, Kai's attention subtly shifted back to the rest of the showroom. He watched as Richard greeted another customer, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit. The contrast in behavior was striking. Richard's demeanor transformed entirely, his posture relaxed, his voice friendly and inviting. He extended his hand to the man, laughing at something the customer said. The interaction was effortless, a complete reversal of how he had treated Kai just moments ago. Kai didn't react outwardly, but his eyes lingered on Richard for a moment longer before returning to Lisa. He asked a few more questions about the car, thanked her again, and excused himself. Outside, the air was crisp and quiet compared to the tense atmosphere inside. Kai stood near the entrance, his back to the glass doors, and made a quick phone call. "I'm here," he said into the phone, his voice low and composed. "I've seen enough. Let's move forward." There was a brief pause, followed by a calm reply on the other end of the line. Kai nodded once, said "thank you," and hung up. Inside, the atmosphere hadn't changed. Richard was still laughing with the suited customer, oblivious to the quiet storm that was about to unfold. Lisa glanced over at Kai as he re-entered, her expression uncertain but hopeful. Kai gave her a reassuring nod before taking a seat near the luxury models. Kai had said little, but his actions had already set the wheels in motion. For Richard, this was just another day at work. But for Kai, it was something far more significant. The atmosphere in the dealership remained unchanged. Conversations continued, the sound of keyboards clicking blended with occasional laughter from nearby desks. Richard Hill, standing near the center of the showroom, appeared to have returned to business as usual. Kai, however, had just taken a seat, watching everything unfold with quiet composure. Moments later, the front doors swung open, and a tall man in a tailored suit strode into the showroom. He carried an air of authority that immediately shifted the room's energy. This was Daniel Harris, the longtime owner of the dealership, a man rarely seen on the floor unless something required his attention. Richard noticed him immediately, his demeanor shifting into one of forced enthusiasm. "Mr. Harris," Richard called out, walking briskly toward him, a practiced smile spreading across his face. "What brings you down here today?" Daniel didn't respond right away. Instead, he scanned the room, his expression neutral but focused. His eyes landed on Kai, who stood calmly, giving the faintest nod of acknowledgement. Daniel returned the gesture before finally addressing Richard. "I'm here to introduce someone," Daniel said, his tone calm but deliberate. He gestured toward Kai. "This is Kai James." Richard's brow furrowed slightly as he glanced between Daniel and Kai. "Yes, I know, we've spoken," he said, the hesitation in his voice betraying his discomfort. Daniel continued, his voice steady, but carried a weight that demanded attention. "Kai isn't just a customer, he's the new co-owner of this dealership. As of this morning, he's acquired a majority stake in the business." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Conversations halted, heads turned, and the bustling showroom fell into an uneasy silence. Richard's practiced smile froze on his face, his mouth opening slightly as if to respond, but no words came. "Wait, what?" Richard finally stammered, his voice cracking slightly. What?" Daniel didn't repeat himself. Instead, he turned to Kai, stepping aside to let him address the room. Kai took a step forward, his posture calm yet commanding. He looked directly at Richard, his voice steady and clear. "When I walked in here earlier today, I came as a customer," Kai began, his tone firm but measured. "I came to buy a car just like anyone else. But instead of being treated with respect, I was dismissed, ignored, and humiliated by you." Each word landed with precision. Staff members stood frozen, their eyes darting between Kai and Richard. Customers nearby watched in stunned silence, some shifting uncomfortably. Kai continued, "You didn't see me for who I am. You only saw what you assumed about me. You made it clear that respect here isn't given, it's earned, but only for the people you deem worthy." "I stayed quiet earlier," Kai said, his voice unwavering, "because I wanted to understand exactly how this business is run. What I saw was unacceptable." Kai turned slightly, addressing not just Richard but the entire room. "Let me make one thing clear. This dealership will no longer be a place where people are judged by their appearance, their background, or your assumptions about them. Starting today, this business will be run with integrity, respect, and fairness for everyone." The weight of Kai's words hung in the air, undeniable and unshakable. For Richard, there was no escaping the truth of what had just unfolded. I didn't realize," Richard began, his voice faltering. Kai raised a hand, silencing him. "You didn't realize because you didn't care to. But now, things are different." "To the rest of you," Kai said, his tone softening slightly, "if you're willing to be part of this change, I welcome you. But if you think you can continue to act the way I was treated today, this isn't the place for you." As Kai spoke, the staff exchanged glances, some nodding in silent agreement, others looking uneasy. The customers who had witnessed the exchange remained quiet, their expressions a mix of shock and admiration. "This is your opportunity to reflect," Kai said simply, "because the way this business moves forward is up to all of us. But for you, Richard, I think your time here is over." With that, Kai stepped back, his presence commanding respect in a way no one could ignore. Daniel nodded in agreement, placing a hand on Kai's shoulder as he gestured for the staff to return to work. As the weight of Kai's final words settled over the room, Richard Hill's face drained of color. His carefully crafted demeanor, built on years of unchecked authority, crumbled in the face of the undeniable truth. Daniel Harris, the dealership's long-standing owner, turned to Richard with a sharp, measured gaze. "This is not how we do business," Daniel said firmly, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "Your actions today have shown that you don't represent the values this dealership must uphold. Effective immediately, your employment here is terminated." "But I've been here for years," Richard stammered, his words coming out in a rush. "This was just—" Daniel raised a hand to stop him. "This was more than just a mistake. It was a reflection of behavior that has no place here." As Richard stood frozen, his dismissal echoed not just as a personal consequence, but as a statement to everyone present. Moments like these were rarely so public, but this one needed to be. After Richard's exit, Daniel turned back to Kai, his demeanor shifting to one of genuine remorse. "Mr. James," Daniel began, his voice low but sincere, "I want to personally apologize for everything you've experienced here today. This dealership has failed to maintain the values I thought it stood for, and I take full responsibility for that." Kai nodded, acknowledging the apology, but not letting the moment pass without purpose. "It's not just about me," Kai said, his tone thoughtful. "It's about every customer who walks through those doors. If they're treated like I was, this isn't just a bad business, it's a broken one." The words carried a weight that Daniel couldn't ignore. Standing in the presence of someone who had quietly endured such blatant disrespect only to rise above it, he realized this was an opportunity to change, not just for the dealership, but for the community it served. Kai's voice filled the room, steady and unwavering. "This dealership has the potential to be more than just a place to sell cars. It can be a symbol of opportunity, fairness, and respect. To make that happen, we're implementing mandatory training for every employee, training that focuses on combating bias and creating an environment where everyone is treated equally." "But it doesn't stop there," Kai continued. "We're launching a community outreach program aimed at creating opportunities for those who've been overlooked, just like I was. Whether it's offering internships, sponsorships, or partnering with local organizations, this dealership is going to be a force for change." Kai's vision went beyond repairing the immediate harm caused that day. It was about reshaping the culture, not just within the dealership, but in the broader community. "We're starting small," Kai said to the group, "but this is just the beginning. Your success, your future, it matters to us, and we're here to support you." The showroom, once a symbol of exclusivity, was becoming a hub of inclusivity and empowerment. Employees began to see their roles in a new light, recognizing the importance of treating every customer with the respect they deserved. This story isn't just about one man or one dealership. It's a reminder of the power of persistence, the value of respect, and the importance of standing up against the biases that still linger in our society. Kai James didn't just buy a car that day. He bought a new future for this dealership and the people it serves, because sometimes change doesn't happen in grand gestures. It starts with quiet determination and a refusal to accept anything less than dignity. This isn't just a story about a car dealership. It's a story about how assumptions can blind us, how prejudice can strip away basic human decency, and how standing firm in the face of injustice can lead to meaningful change. What happened to Kai James could happen to anyone. It's a reminder that our actions, no matter how small they may seem, have the power to impact others in ways we may not realize. We all carry biases, some we're aware of, and others we may not even recognize. But what matters is whether we choose to confront them, whether we're willing to listen, learn, and treat every person with the respect they deserve. The question is, how do you treat the people you encounter every day? Do you see them for who they are, or who you assume them to be? This story challenges us to think beyond ourselves, to recognize that every individual has value and to understand that change begins when we're brave enough to demand it. Have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination like this? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us of the power of respect, resilience, and change.